Sometimes, it only takes one small act of courage to spark a revolution. Meet Emily Torres, an 11-year-old with a sharp mind and an even sharper sense of justice. What started as a simple math test turned into a fight for fairness that would change her school, and the entire education system, forever. When Emily spots an error in her standardized test, she makes a choice that sends shockwaves through her school. Suspended for speaking out, she refuses to back down. But what happens next will leave you inspired. This is the story of a brave sixth grader who stood up for what was right, proving that even the smallest voices can make the loudest impact. Stick around to see how her courage led to a movement that transformed schools across the state. This is a story you don't want to miss. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the quiet classroom of Lincoln Elementary. Rows of desks were filled with sixth-grade students, heads bent over their district-wide achievement test booklets. The only sounds were the scratching of pencils and the occasional shuffle of paper. It was a moment of tense concentration, as every student knew this test would play a big part in determining their future placements in school. Among them sat Emily Torres, an 11-year-old with bright eyes and an innate curiosity that had often gotten her in trouble for asking too many questions. Emily was the kind of student who read the fine print, double-checked her work and always asked why. Today, as she worked through the math section of the test, her sharp mind and attention to detail caught something strange. Flipping to a question on geometry, Emily frowned. The problem was about calculating the area of a triangle, but none of the answer choices matched the solution she'd been taught. She stared at it, double-checked her calculations and even tried solving it a different way, but it was clear, the question was wrong. She hesitated. The rules of the test were strict. No talking, no disruptions. Emily glanced at the clock ticking above the whiteboard. Should she just move on and ignore it? But her conscience wouldn't let her. Her hand went up, trembling slightly. "Excuse me, Mr. Franklin," she whispered cautiously when the teacher approached her desk. "I think this question might have a mistake. The answer choices don't fit the problem." Mr. Franklin, a tall man with glasses perched on his nose, frowned as he leaned over to look at the test. His brow furrowed as he read the question. After a moment he sighed. "Emily, the tests have been reviewed by experts. Please just select the answer you think is best." Emily's chest tightened. That wasn't the response she was hoping for. "But what if there are other mistakes?" she whispered, her voice insistent but low. "If this one question is wrong, doesn't that mean other questions could be too? What if it messes up everyone's scores?" A few of her classmates looked up from their tests, curious about the exchange. Whispers started spreading across the room. Emily could hear snippets. "What's wrong? A mistake in the test? Seriously?" Mr. Franklin straightened up, his face now showing signs of irritation. "Everyone focus on your own tests," he said, clapping his hands for attention. "There are no other mistakes. Emily, I need you to keep working or there will be consequences." Emily felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She could just stay quiet and finish the test like everyone else. But the question gnawed at her. She'd always been taught that if something seemed wrong, she should speak up. That if something wasn't fair, she had to try to make it right. Her pencil trembled in her hand as she thought about her options. Her gaze flickered to her classmates, some of whom were now watching her intently, their faces a mix of curiosity and confusion. Taking a deep breath, she made her decision. She couldn't stay silent. Emily's heart raced as she raised her hand again. This time her voice was steady, stronger than before. "This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. If there are mistakes, it's not fair to anyone." A hush fell over the room, broken only by the sound of students shifting in their seats. Her classmates exchanged nervous glances, then slowly began flipping through their booklets, scanning for errors. A murmur of uncertainty rippled through the air as one by one, they started whispering to each other. "I think she's right," one boy said. "Wait, this question doesn't make sense either," added a girl near the back. The quiet classroom was suddenly alive with voices, each one louder than the last. Pencils clattered onto desks as students leaned over to compare notes. The murmur grew into a buzz and then a chaotic hum filled the room. "Quiet. Everyone quiet down," Mr. Franklin shouted, his face flushed. He clapped his hands sharply, but it did little to calm the growing unrest. Turning to Emily, his frustration was evident. "Enough, Emily. This is not your job to decide. If you don't focus on your test right now, I'll have to send you to the principal's office." Emily's hands clenched into fists at her sides. The weight of her classmates' eyes on her made her feel small, but her conviction was stronger. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I won't take a test that might be wrong. It's not fair to any of us." The class erupted again. Some students clapped, others gasped in shock. A few stared wide-eyed, unsure of what to make of her defiance. Mr. Franklin's face turned an alarming shade of red. Without another word, he grabbed a slip of paper from his desk, scribbled something on it and gestured toward the door. "Go to the principal's office." "Now," he said, his voice icy. Emily felt her cheeks burn as she walked out of the room, clutching the referral slip in her trembling hand. Her classmates watched her go in stunned silence, the buzzing whispers following her all the way to the hallway. In the principal's office, Emily sat on the edge of a cold, hard chair, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure Principal Carter could hear it. The man sat behind his large oak desk, his expression grim. "Emily," he began, folding his hands together. "Disrupting a district test is a serious offense. This is a test administered by the state, and it's vital that all students complete it without interruptions." "But there was a mistake," Emily said, her voice quieter now but still firm. "How can we trust the rest of the test if one question is wrong? I was only trying to do what's fair." Principal Carter sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Mistakes happen, but they don't justify disrupting an entire classroom. I'm suspending you for the rest of the week." Emily's breath hitched. Suspended? She had never even been sent to the office before. Tears stung her eyes as the weight of the punishment settled over her. What would her parents say? What would her classmates think? For the first time, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But deep down, a small voice reminded her, "You did the right thing." The sterile smell of the principal's office greeted Maria and Daniel Torres as they walked in, their faces a mixture of concern and confusion. Behind the desk sat Principal Carter, his expression stern but tinged with discomfort. Emily sat in a chair across from him, her head bowed and her eyes red from tears. "Mr. and Mrs. Torres," Principal Carter began, clearing his throat, "your daughter caused a significant disruption during the district test this morning. She not only refused to complete the test but also encouraged other students to question it, leading to chaos in the classroom." Maria's eyes narrowed as she glanced at Emily. "Emily, is this true?" Emily's hands fidgeted in her lap, but she looked up at her parents. Her voice trembled, but her words were resolute. "There was a mistake in the test. I just wanted to make sure it was fair for everyone." Daniel's brows furrowed as he turned back to the principal. "A mistake? On a state-administered test? That's not a small issue." "It was a minor error," Principal Carter said quickly, his tone dismissive. "The rest of the test is perfectly valid." "How can you be sure of that?" Daniel pressed, his voice rising slightly. "If one question is wrong, what does that say about the rest of the test? This isn't just about Emily, it's about every student in that room." The principal's expression hardened. "Mr. Torres, I understand your concern, but this is a controlled, state-approved assessment. Emily's behavior disrupted the process, and she needs to face the consequences." Maria reached for Emily's hand. "You're punishing her for asking questions and standing up for what's fair?" "I'm suspending her for the rest of the week," Principal Carter said, his tone final. The Torres family walked out of the school in silence, Emily clutching her mother's hand tightly. As they got into the car, Emily's tears began to flow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to make everyone angry." Maria turned in her seat to face her daughter. "Emily, you have nothing to be sorry for. You saw something wrong and spoke up. That's not easy to do." "But I caused so much trouble," Emily sniffled. "Maybe I should have just stayed quiet?" "No," Daniel said firmly, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "You did the right thing. If nobody speaks up, nothing ever changes." That evening, over a quiet dinner, the family talked about what had happened. Maria set down her fork and looked at her daughter. "Emily, we're proud of you. Sometimes doing the right thing has consequences, but that doesn't make it any less right." Emily managed a small smile. "Even if it gets me suspended?" Daniel chuckled. "Even then. But this isn't over. If the test had a mistake, the school and the district need to take responsibility for it." An idea began to take shape as the family discussed the situation. What if this wasn't just about Emily? What if they could make the school, and the testing system, accountable for every student? By the end of the night, their determination was clear. They wouldn't let this go without a fight. The sun streamed through the kitchen window as Emily sat quietly at the table, doodling on a scrap of paper. While she stayed home, her parents were hard at work. Maria and Daniel Torres began their campaign for justice by calling every parent they could think of. "Did your child notice anything strange during the test?" Maria asked over the phone. "Do you know what happened to Emily?" Daniel inquired during a conversation with another parent after work. As the hours turned into days, they expanded their efforts. Maria reached out to a local news station, sharing Emily's story. "It's not just about her suspension," she told a reporter. "This is about fairness for every student." Daniel contacted a family friend, a lawyer named Rachel Martinez, who agreed to review the case pro bono. By the end of the week, Emily's story was making waves. Parents in the district began questioning the integrity of the test, and reporters started digging into the state's testing system. Online forums buzzed with debates about standardized testing and the rights of students. On Monday morning, the Torres family walked through the school's front doors, their lawyer Rachel flanking them. Emily's heart raced as they passed through the crowded hallways. Students whispered and pointed, and a few even smiled at her in silent support. Inside Principal Carter's office, the tension was palpable. Carter sat stiffly behind his desk, his usual authority overshadowed by the presence of Rachel, who placed her briefcase neatly on the table before speaking. "Principal Carter, by suspending Emily for pointing out a legitimate error, the school has violated her right to freedom of expression," Rachel said firmly. "She didn't disrupt the test maliciously, she raised a concern about its accuracy. That's not grounds for punishment." Carter fidgeted with a pen in his hand. "This isn't about her concern, it's about the disruption she caused," he said, his voice defensive. "The testing environment must remain controlled." Rachel leaned forward. "The disruption was a result of the school's failure to ensure the test was error-free. My client should not be penalized for your oversight." The debate continued for nearly an hour. Emily sat quietly, gripping her mother's hand as voices rose and fell. Finally, Principal Carter sighed heavily. "We will reinstate Emily immediately," he said, his voice strained. "And we'll conduct an independent review of the test." Maria's face softened in relief, but Rachel wasn't finished. "What about the suspension on her record?" she asked. Carter shook his head. "The suspension stays. That's non-negotiable." The Torres family exchanged glances. While it wasn't the perfect outcome, it was a significant step forward. When Emily stepped out of the office, she was greeted by the sight of dozens of students gathered in the hallway. Their faces lit up as she emerged, and a cheer erupted. "You're a hero, Emily," one boy shouted, pumping his fist in the air. "Yeah, way to go," another added. Emily felt her cheeks flush, but she couldn't help smiling. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt lighter. It wasn't just about her anymore. This was about something bigger. As she walked down the hallway, students clapped her on the back and gave her high fives. The principal's office door closed behind her, but the fight for justice was far from over. Emily's stand was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the impact of Emily's courage rippled far beyond the walls of Lincoln Elementary. The independent review of the district's standardized test revealed more errors than anyone had anticipated. Headlines in the local news proclaimed, "Standardized test errors spark controversy across district." The fallout was swift. The school district was forced to discard the test results entirely, admitting that the errors had compromised the integrity of the assessment. Administrators promised sweeping reforms to prevent future mistakes, but for many students and parents, the issue went deeper. The debate around the fairness and effectiveness of standardized testing had begun in earnest. Back at school, Emily was determined to channel her experience into something positive. With the support of her parents and a few teachers who admired her bravery, she launched a new initiative, a student council focused on giving kids a voice in school decisions. The council's first project was simple but powerful, a feedback system where students could anonymously report concerns about tests, textbooks, and school policies. Emily and her fellow council members worked tirelessly to make it happen, designing suggestion boxes and even creating a small online platform for submissions. To everyone's surprise, the idea gained traction quickly. Within weeks, the council was flooded with suggestions. Complaints about unclear test questions, ideas for improving cafeteria meals, and even proposals for new extracurricular activities. Emily's efforts didn't stop there. She started reaching out to other schools in the district, encouraging them to adopt similar programs. Soon, schools across the state began implementing their own student feedback systems, inspired by what became known as the Lincoln Initiative. Months later, Emily was sitting in her classroom when an announcement crackled over the intercom. "Will Emily Torres please report to the auditorium?" Confused but curious, Emily followed a teacher to the assembly hall. As she stepped inside, she was met with a sea of students, teachers, and parents. At the podium stood a representative from the governor's office, smiling warmly. "This is a special day," the representative began, her voice echoing in the large room. Today we celebrate not just a young girl's courage but a movement she inspired. Thanks to Emily Torres and her unwavering commitment to fairness and justice, I am proud to announce the passing of a new bill, the Emily Torres Student Advocacy Act. Gasps filled the auditorium as the representative continued. This law guarantees that all students have the right to question and provide feedback on their educational experiences without fear of punishment. The crowd erupted into applause. Emily's parents, sitting near the front, beamed with pride as their daughter was called to the stage. With trembling hands, Emily accepted a plaque commemorating her contributions. As she turned to face the crowd, she saw Principal Carter standing at the back of the auditorium, clapping quietly with a small, reluctant smile. The sight gave her a bittersweet sense of satisfaction. In the days that followed, Emily's story spread far and wide. Schools across the country began adopting new measures to ensure students felt empowered to speak up. Teachers started holding discussions about critical thinking and fairness in education, and many districts began exploring alternatives to traditional standardized testing. One evening, as Emily sat at the dinner table with her family, she looked up and smiled. "I never thought something so small, one question, could lead to all this." Her mother reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "That's the power of standing up for what's right, Emily." As she walked into school the next day, head held high, Emily was greeted by smiles and waves from her classmates. She knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but she also knew one thing for certain. Even the smallest voices could make the biggest changes. Emily's story reminds us that sometimes, it only takes one voice to spark change. What started with a single question turned into a movement that transformed not just her school but schools across the state, and beyond. Her courage to speak up, even when it wasn't easy, taught us that fairness and accountability in education matter, and that every student's voice deserves to be heard. So what about you? Have you ever questioned something that didn't feel right or spoken up when you saw a problem? Share your story in the comments below. Let's inspire each other to be bold, to be brave, and to make a difference. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to hear more stories of everyday heroes just like Emily. Together we can change the world, one small act of courage at a time.